Okay, welcome to the data literacy class. We are in Unit 0.0, big picture. Again, the zero here represents the chapter number, but there is no chapter zero, so you don't need to read anything for this particular video lecture. Now, let's talk about the bigger picture in terms of like, what is this course about in general first, then we'll take an example of what all the skills that you learn throughout the semester. So buckle up. Okay, so what is this class about? Well, by the end of this class, you should be able to um, show your skills specific to data literacy. In other words, you will be a data literate by the end of this course. Now, you might have seen this flyer, and this is specific to these infographics you see here. Now, given the COVID situation, there are a lot of infographics you see daily on the web, right? The question is, can you make sense of the information presented in these infographics? Well, one of the learning outcomes is to give you those skills specific to not only comprehending the visual infographics that you encounter in a day-to-day life, but also to critically evaluate these infographics and see if it is accurate. Now, not only that, you actually go behind the scenes and try to learn the skills specific to creating your own infographics, if not in this fashionable way, but in some format. You learn the skills to be able to create such informative summaries of the data. But for you to do so, though, you should be able to navigate through these steps in that order. And we'll talk about what these steps are and what you do at each of these steps in the next slide when we look at an example scenario. So the idea is when you learn these skills, you should be able to create your own summaries by actually finding some real data in the real world. And then not only that, you'll not only create summaries of this sort, but you'll also write down in a formal fashion your summary in a narrative format. So let's dig deeper into these steps and the main purpose of this class in the next slide. Well, let's dig deeper and try to understand the bigger purpose, the main purpose of this course. Now, the main purpose of this course is to learn skills specific to answering questions. Now, it starts with a question. So you have a question about a real world situation. For instance, you have a question about COVID-19 and you want to find answers to that question, but not any simple answer, but an answer that is backed up by data. So in order to answer such question, first you need to frame the question appropriately, right? So the main purpose is to find the answer to the question. That's the big thing. That's always should be in your mind. Whenever throughout this semester, if there is one thing that you have to keep in mind all along through all these units, is the main purpose, which is how do I get to an answer to a real world question I have based on the data that is available in the world. That is the bottom line. Now, for you to do that, to go from question to the answer, or even to create or develop a question that is appropriate, you should be able to go through these skills or these steps and learn the skills specific to it. First of all, you need to identify, once you have ascertained a question, you have to identify relevant data set that would help you answer this question. Now, for instance, let's say you have a question about COVID-19, then you'll search for data sets. Now, we're not talking about specifics of these steps. I'm just giving you a bigger picture of what these steps are. So you learn in detail the skills specific to these skills later on. So the first step is once you have a question, you identify the data sets by searching for it and the different ways of searching. And once you identify the data sets, then you select the most important ones. For instance, if you have a question about COVID-19, most probably this would be one of your important data sets, sources of data sets like World Health Organization. Then once you identify the data set, the next step is to actually obtain them. In other words, get the actual data set, access the data set. Now, how do you access the data set? Well, it is different. It changes from question to question. Some data is readily available online where you can directly download the data and then do your magic. Other times you have to dig deeper, especially information on government sites in the US is not easily accessible. You have to use some tips, tricks of the trade to actually get to those data points. And you learn that in the obtaining data unit. Then once you obtain the data, sometimes it's not available at all. Then there is a way to get some sort kind of data set that is not readily available by officially going through requesting the data set. That's another skill you learn in this unit. Now, once you have access to the data set, in other words, when you obtain the data sets, now the data set is sitting on your computer. What do you do next? Well, the next thing you do is evaluate the data set. Now, remember, we talked about data files, or you'll learn about data files in the next unit. So once you have this data files or this data set, you'll try to you try to evaluate the data set. What is the structure of the data set? Is it in a format that would allow me to work on it so I can answer the question? Or do I need to make changes? What kind of is it with some issues in it? If so, is there a way to fix it? So all these skills are relevant to this particular step called evaluating the obtained data set. So you have a question, you identify sources of the data sets, then to answer the question, then you obtain the data set, and then you on your computer evaluate the data set, the credibility, the source, everything else about the data set, um, and then start working on it. And that's the analyze part. In the analyze part, you learn the skills specific to summarizing data, you learn specific to running different kinds of analysis to answer questions, and so those skills would be specific to this particular step. Finally, once you analyze the data, then you kind of visually represent that, and we'll talk about learn different skills, different ways of visually representing data to give your narrative so that you can state your question and answer this question by referring to this infograph or the picture that you have represented visually. Now, keep in mind, this starts with a question and ends with an answer. And all these steps we are referring to are the steps in between. And sometimes you have to reiterate, go through this process over and over again to kind of confirm the question, then go back to the process, then find new data. So it's an iterative process. But at a very general level, what you're doing though, you're starting from here, ending here. So you have started with the question, you find an answer by going through these steps. Now the next step is writing in a professional format a narrative. You'll write a narrative of the answer you have developed in an argumentative form. Again, this is specific to academic writing, and we'll talk more about this. But in the next slide, I'm kind of show you the basic writing template, if you will, or the rhetoric we use. Um, in the next slide, we'll talk about Tolman's model. Again, I won't talk about the model itself. That will be part of an assignment. Again, we'll talk about it next week. But just keep in mind that if you're starting with a question, answering a question, and these are the steps that are the things that you need to go through, then the final product is your professional style report of it, which requires you also to learn the academic writing skills specific to providing this answer to the question in an argumentative form. So I'll give you some information about it in the next slide. So it's all about questions in the real world and finding an answer and then reporting it by going through these steps. Now, we said that the main purpose is to answer a question in the real world based on the data that is available by going through the 6 steps that we looked at earlier. And eventually, you will write a professional style narrative, academic narrative. And for that, we use the Tolman's model of the narrative. So, which includes a claim and a reason and a warrant backing. There's a lot of information here. Again, I'm not going in detail. I'm just giving you an idea that eventually you'll also learn the skills specific to writing professionally the summary of how or what your question was and what your answer is, and report it by using Tolman's method. This is the course objective. This is a list of course objectives or learning outcomes for this course. Now, this is pretty much everything that we discussed in previous slides, but all put together. So, what do? As we said, you always start with a question and find an answer and produce that answer in the academic narrative format using Tolman's model of arguments. So course objectives, by the end of this course, you should be able to develop a research question. Remember, I said question. By identifying relevant data sources, we talked about that process. Then assess the quality and appropriateness of the data source to facilitate the evaluation and analysis of the data. Then analyze the actual data to draw conclusions, which are basically answers to the questions. Um, then develop an argument, which is basically a question answer sequence of narrative based on the analysis, which in a professional academic manner by using Tolman's model. Then support the argument with the help of appropriate data visualizations. Remember, we said you learn the skills to developing visual representations of the analyzed data. Well, you'll support your argumentative narrative with the help of these representations. Then eventually you'll develop answer to the questions. These are the real questions in the real world. So in your final project, you'll actually take up a real world question that you can answer with the data that is available by using all these steps that you will learn throughout the semester. Then not only that, you should be able to critique arguments that you have drawn yourself from the data by going through this process, but also be able to critically critique the argument somebody else has developed by reading academic actual papers. So I'm excited. I hope you are too. And if it doesn't make any sense or if you need help with anything, I'm available all the time. You just need to let me know and I'll be there to help you out. Now, what I'm doing next is like I have different slides now, and each slide has unit-specific objectives. Okay, so let me pause here, and then I'll see you in the next slide. So in the last slide, we looked at the course objectives, and these course objectives are listed here, right? Develop research question by identifying, if you remember, all these are listed here. Now, there is this mapping the course and unit objectives. What it means is that these are the bigger course objectives that that I intend you to learn by the end of this course. And these course objectives are further divided into module objectives or unit objectives. So this class or this course has in fact, 6 units, starting with unit 0 to unit 5. Where in unit 0, you will learn about the bigger picture, and you learn the actual steps starting unit 3 to unit 5. Now, the point is that in the course mapping worksheet that you will see in in your course materials on Blackboard, is that each unit itself has its own unit objectives, and these unit objectives I have not tracked here, but are related to these overall bigger course objectives. So you can see different units listed here with the course objectives listed here, and a tracked version of how these are all connected. The idea is this: by the end of this semester, you should be able to um, do all these things. But and this bigger course objectives are met by helping you learning these individuals skills at each of these unit levels. And if you go through this worksheet yourself, it will give you a better idea. Now, now I'll stop here, but I also want to let you know that there are 5 other slides at least after these, and I'm not going to go over those slides, but those are the slides specific to each of these unit objectives. So when you get time, you can look at those, and um, we'll actually, for each unit, when we talk about each unit, for instance, when I talk about unit 0 video lecture, it actually lists all these units again. So the idea is the same. You start with the question and find an answer. You go through these steps, but you'll reach these course objectives by learning these, by meeting these unit objectives individually. Finally, you will be data literate. That is the main idea of this class. I hope you're enjoying this class. Stay tuned. Again, you can email me to set up an appointment to meet with me. I'm actually very, very excited to meet with you. So fill those, what do you say, the sign up sheet links, use those to provide me with your available times to meet next week and the last week of this course. Have fun, enjoy, um, and stay tuned. Have fun learning.